Hello, my name is Philippe Girard, and I am a professor in the history department at McNeese State University.
And I am Janet Allured. Welcome to Your Grandma Rocks, where we explore the lives of famous women.
Welcome and bienvenue à nos amis francophones. Ceci est la radio de l'Université McNeese.
On the program today, music and history as we retrace the life of a remarkable woman who was a diplomat and a geisha who played a central role when Japan and the United States first established trade relations in the 19th century. She's now a cultural icon in Japan and beyond. Her name was Okichi Saito.
We'll study her life, and along the way we will sample some sounds from modern Japanese rock and pop, and a tiny bit of opera as well by both men and women. We'll start with the 2012 song Sky Limit by the singer Yo-Yo.
That was Sky Limit by the Japanese singer Yo-Yo. Welcome back to Your Grandma Rocks and the life of the 19th century Japanese woman Okichi Saito. I am Janet Allured.
And I am Philippe Girard. As often in women's history, we are kind of limited by the lack of sources, which is made worse by the many myths surrounding the life of Okichi. But as far as we know, she was born on November 10th of 1841 to a family of ship carpenters in the peninsula of Izu.
It's located halfway between Tokyo and Nagoya on the southern coast of Japan within sight of Mount Fuji.
She came from a modest household, and so at the age of 7, the young Okichi was sold to the former mistress of a local lord who trained her to be a geisha.
Geishas are often seen as prostitutes today, but they were also artists, known as much for their musical talents as for the sexual services that they provided.
And it can be a bit problematic to impose our own 21st American notions of sexual propriety onto another country and era.
Still, it's troubling to imagine a prepubescent girl raised in what was essentially a very fancy brothel.
Indeed, and as a father of girls myself, I find that a bit troublesome.
Anyway, she graduated at the age of 14, and she began a career as a geisha.
And it was around that time that a tsunami ravaged the Izu Peninsula where she lived and destroyed her house, which left her destitute. But luckily, a childhood friend named Tsurumatsu offered his assistance and his comfort, and eventually they became romantically involved. His exact status is unclear. There was no Facebook at the time, so various accounts describe him as the lover of Okichi, her fiancé, or even her husband.
But there were other important things about to happen in her life, too, including a fateful encounter with an American consul that would change the history of U.S.-Japanese relations.
Since you brought up the relationship of Okichi to that American consul, let's stop for a minute and listen to a Japanese rock band named, appropriately enough, our story, Dirty Old Man. Their song is called Yowamushi na Hono. This was Yowamushi na Hono by the Japanese band Dirty Old Man. My name is Philippe Girard.
And I'm Janet Allured. Welcome back to Your Grandma Rocks on KBYS and the life of Okichi, a teenager who lived in the city of Shimoda in 1850s Japan.
And that was a period known as the Tokugawa era in Japan, and that's named after the warlords who ruled Japan at the time. For centuries, the Tokugawas shielded Japan from the outside world through laws known as the Exclusion Edicts. The laws forbade any kind of outside cultural contact with the world, including the Catholic faith. Japanese nationals could not travel abroad under penalty of death. Foreign merchants were generally barred from visiting Japan to do commerce there.
This kind of isolation didn't sit well with U.S. policymakers in the 19th century because they wanted to open new markets in East Asia. So in 1852, President Fillmore asked Commodore Matthew Perry to outfit a fleet of warships and sail to Japan with a stern message: open trade relations with the United States or else.
That kind of rough behavior was pretty common back then in diplomacy. They even had a name for it. They called that gunboat diplomacy.
Yes, the Japanese had fallen behind technologically during their long period of isolation, and they couldn't fight back. So they reluctantly agreed to open negotiations with the United States.
And that's how the history of U.S.-Japanese trade relations began. Think about that next time you buy a Toyota Camry or a Sony PlayStation.
After the success of the Perry expedition, the United States appointed a consul general in the city of Shimoda, where Okichi lived. His name was Townsend Harris. His mission was to negotiate a permanent trade treaty with Japan.
One day in 1856, the story goes, Consul Harris saw the young Okichi leave a bathhouse, and he was immediately taken with her.
And you know, our listeners are going to know Okichi, Philippe, even though they didn't know that they are going to know Okichi, because this becomes a very famous story picked up later. Japanese authorities immediately realized the role that Okichi could play. Negotiations with the consul were not going well, and there was no way to protect Japan's interests when the United States had gunboats and Japan had none.
So the shogun, the Tokugawa leader, he figured that Okichi could be used as a kind of fresh bait to soften up the American consul and then obtain a better deal.
The consul was born in 1804, so he was 37 years older than Okichi. She wasn't too keen on seducing that old foreigner, to say the least. She didn't see herself as a prostitute or a pawn, but as a trained geisha artist who already had a man whom she loved.
Well, that didn't stop Japanese authorities. To mollify the fiancé a little bit, they offered to make him a samurai in the nobility. That took him out of the picture. Meanwhile, they told the poor little Okichi that she needed to put her own feelings aside and sacrifice herself for the good of the country. She reluctantly accepted, and then she moved into the household of the consul.
This is a classic tale of passion conflicting with duty, one that goes as far back as Antigone. These stories usually don't end well. Let's take another musical break, shall we?
I have just a song for you. There's a song by the Japanese band Perfume, and it has very good advice for women stuck in that kind of relationship. And the song is called Fake It.
「
Welcome back to Your Grandma Rocks on KBYS. That was Fake It by the Japanese band Perfume. I'm Janet Allured.
And I am Philippe Girard. Our topic today is Okichi, a geisha who in the 1850s became the mistress of the first U.S. Consul General to Japan, whose name was Townsend Harris.
Okichi's job was to seduce the U.S. consul and convince him to sign a more favorable treaty with Japan. She succeeded, and within a year the treaty was signed. Then the U.S. consul moved to the capital of Tokyo, and Okichi followed him there.
You might think that Okichi would have been seen as a heroine in Japan. She had sacrificed herself to serve the country's needs, and she had accomplished her mission. But her countrymen saw her as the embodiment of the U.S. commercial penetration of Japan, which was seen as a national humiliation. So they called her names, like Tojin Okichi, Okichi the barbarian, and then she began to drink.
Her love life wasn't going too great either. She had to leave her fiancé when she moved in with Harris. Then, after a few years, the consul went back to the U.S. and left her behind, so she began to drink some more.
And after the departure of that consul, she opened a geisha house to make a living. But then her business went bankrupt, and
Let me guess, she drank some more.
She drank some more.
Heartbroken and desperate, she drowned herself in 1892.
And that is how ended the tragic life of Okichi Saito, who gave herself to an American foreigner to help Japan, only to be shunned by her own people in return.
When she died, no one in her family would claim her body, so a priest took it and buried it in a temple in her hometown of Shimoda. It can still be visited today, along with a little museum dedicated to the sad but beautiful life of Okichi.
I think it's time to liven things up a little. Have you ever heard of the girl bands of Japan?
Can't say that I have.
Well, you have dozens of singers, dancers, and then some catchy pop tunes. It's not too like. We'll listen to one particular band, AKB48, and this song is called Shonichi.
「
Welcome back to KBYS, the MacNeese Radio. This was the song Shonichi by the band AKB48. I'm Janet Allured.
And I am Philippe Girard. We just retraced the life of the geisha named Okichi, who served as a go-between between the United States and Japan back in the 1850s.
Her life ended tragically, but her long-term influence was notable. It's because of people like her that Japan opened itself to the world and became a key member of the international community.
But the Japanese always saw this opening to international trade as a humiliation because of what women like Okichi had to endure. And so in the years that followed, the Japanese decided to modernize their economy and to build up their army. This way, they would never be bullied again by a fleet of foreign warships from the United States. This is what began the development of Japan as an economic and as a military power, which led ultimately to prosperity, which was great, but also war with the United States in World War II.
So kind of a monster that we created ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
But enough with Okichi, the historical figure. Let's talk about Okichi, the fictional character.
And there it's kind of hard to separate myths from history. Some historians even claim that Okichi only spent a few days as a housekeeper in the household of the consul, and that much of her story has been fabricated by later generations.
Her life indeed fits many of the archetypes of Victorian melodrama. The beautiful and innocent heroine who was doomed to a tragic downfall.
So it's no surprise then that Okichi has been featured so often in plays, poems, films, all the way from the novel Butterfly in the Wind by Rei Kimura to the movie Tojin Okichi by the great director Kenji Mizoguchi.
Okichi even has a following outside Japan. We should mention the 1958 Hollywood movie The Barbarian and the Geisha featuring John Wayne as Townsend Harris.
John Wayne in Japan. While we're talking about it, I would like to recommend another John Wayne in Asia movie. Have you ever seen the one where he plays Genghis Khan?
No.
He's there with a crazy mustache and all. It's a movie that was not released for years, in part because it was so bad, but also because it was produced by that great billionaire Howard Hughes, who loved it, and he kept as his own private movie.
Wouldn't release it, huh?
No. It's now available in video if you're interested. But getting back to Okichi, there's also the Giacomo Puccini opera from 1904 called Madame Butterfly, directly inspired by the life of Our Lady, Okichi. And we'll finish our eclectic musical selection today with an excerpt from that opera, interpreted by another woman who also had her share of heartbreak in her life, the Greek soprano Maria Callas. Here is Madame Butterfly.
You're listening to KBYS, the McNeese Radio.
And we just heard Maria Callas singing an excerpt from Madame Butterfly by Puccini. My name is Philippe Girard.
And I'm Janet Allured. In this program, we retrace the life of Okichi, the geisha who was the inspiration for the main character of Madame Butterfly.
Merci, and thank you for joining us.
This program was funded by a Juliet Hartner grant for Women in the Humanities. For more information on how to help finance fellowships at McNeese, contact the Foundation at 337-475-5588.
Another sponsor for this program was the History Department at McNeese. If you're interested in joining the History Department or any other field at McNeese, please call the McNeese Admissions Office. The number is 337-475-5504.
Goodbye.
Au revoir.